So for everybody that came, thank you for coming. Again, my name is Luis Ramos. I'm the solution architect for Rockwell. I'll let everybody introduce themselves as they kind of come up. We're going to be doing a release for PlantPAx. So for everybody that's been here and kind of listened to me in the past, that is our DCS. So we're going to have a system release 4.5 come out. The mainstay for that is going to be Studio 5000 version 31 redundancy that will release at the end of this month. So July 31st is the release date for that. Shortly after that, we'll start seeing all the documentation come out for the new system release of PlantPAx. As you guys know, we kind of talk about this as like the modern DCS. When we're looking at it, it's a full plant-wide system. It connects to everything that we're already used to, control logics, compact logics, third party, you name it. And it is very scalable. So we look at this system as a process skid environment all the way to the full plant environment. So when we start looking at this, as I mentioned, there we go.
I think you're going back up.
I don't know which one I'm going.
No.
No, I'm going.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Don't you love technology? For everybody on the phone, sorry. So again, a lot of the documentation that you'll see with us, it's not just the controller itself. It's all the documentation around how to put a system together. So when we talk about our DCS at PlantPAx, it's a characterized system, meaning different from in Control 5, DLC 5 days, SLICs, when we're looking at the control logics and compact logics, we're defining the parameters on how you should code this. From the CPU utilization, the memory usage, the number of nodes, the type of network. And we also provide a lot of tools in place to verify your system and also do the sizing. So a lot of the documentation around this is going to be around the system architecture, the asset management, the application servers, things of that nature. So with the release of 4.5, there's going to be a couple of different edits that we're going to be looking at. It's going to build on what already exists, and it's also going to take advantage of some of the newer technologies. As you guys know, in the process space, we're at least one system release behind when it comes to Studio 5000 and things of that nature. And in the oil and gas space, we're even further behind. But when we start looking at this, there's going to be a couple differences that you're going to be noticing, but a lot of updates on what versions of software we're using. So first things first, you guys have kind of seen this from us in the past. So this is kind of just a quick check on where we are development-wise when it comes to Studio 5000. The one that we've been waiting on right now, like I said, is that 31.05 firmware redundancy. That is set to release at the end of July. As soon as that hits, then we'll have a chance to be able to release the PlantPAx. That's essentially what we're looking at. It is Windows 10. There is no change to Studio 5000. That is the install that you have for version 31 as of right now. What we're waiting for is the redundancy firmware kit. So as soon as that releases, you can go to PCDC, that product download site, download the firmware, and you're off to the races on being able to accept that. So everything on the screen as of right now, everything that you have installed, we are still running full bore when it comes to Windows 10. So for all of my customers out there, essentially what we're doing is we have now 3 milestones that we're going to be triggering. Studio 5000 version 20, that is still our gold release. If you have any controllers that, I'll call them legacy, but if they have a serial port on the front of them, more than likely I'm going to keep you at version 20, especially if you have to keep track of anything that used to be like Windows XP. The current version of PlantPAx 3.5 and 4 release is using version 24. All of the documentation as of this date is still using version 24 of Studio 5000. If you have it installed, there's no reason to make modifications. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If you have an option to do an upgrade, then that's when we start looking at it or bring us involved to be able to talk about it. This new installation of system release 4.5 of PlantPAx. So everything going forward, all the documentation going forward will be at version 31 of Studio 5000. So those are going to be our 3 milestones. If you bring me an application that you want to create, I'm either going to point you at 20, 24, or 31. And if at all possible, I will point you towards 31. But again, if there are circumstances, legacy equipment that you have to deal with, then that's when we might end up just leaving you at where we were. All of those versions use the same license. So at that point, we don't have to worry about it. You guys know the process for that side. So just a couple of things that you're going to look at. So version 31.05, that is the firmware kit that we're talking about. It will have a SIL 2 TUV certification attached to it. So when we're talking about our SIL 2 systems and its control logics with 1715, we can do version 20, or we'll be able to do version 31 redundancy. So we'll have that option for any systems going forward if we're looking at a SIL 2 system. There's going to be patch upgrades, so you guys know, and we'll talk about it, where what used to be RS Links Enterprise is now FactoryTalk Links. So the new version is version 6. That's just a standard install that you would put there. That's all patched together with version 31.5.
One thing you'll notice on that list, on the redundancy, the L8s are still not on the list. So just because 31.5 redundancy comes out, the L8s have not been addressed at this time.
And we've talked about that in the past, but yeah, L8s, we are planning on redundancy, but we're about 2 years out. So if you want more information, get me out there. EN2TP. So we talked about parallel redundancy in the past. We have talked about being able to do that. We'll be able to support it with the Flex 5000 or with the ControlLogix platform. We were waiting for 31 redundancy to support full redundancy on a PRP solution. So if that is called out in any of the specs that you need, we can now, as soon as this releases, we'll be able to support PRP. In most cases, you still, the recommendation is still to use device lowering or DLR. Any questions on this release? No idea. So what they'll do is in the release notes, they'll put everything that's on there. In most cases, it's smaller items that they found or anything that they've addressed as of version 24 or 28 redundancy. But yeah, as far as the specific ones.
If you ever pull up the redundancy document, they always have anomalies listed in there for each release. That information is easy.
And in most cases, it is also tied to the revision numbers of all the cards and the different patches that they have to do. Okay, so we're going to do a quick demo of this at the end of it. So I was able to get these working. But one of the things that is available to us is outside of PlantPAx, we have what's called Rockwell's process library objects. So how many people have played with that already? Probably less than I want. So you guys need to do some work. So the process library, I'll kind of go over it, but this allows us, it's predefined code that we've created at Rockwell that you guys can freely use for any application. So it doesn't have to be the DCS and it doesn't have to be PlantPAx. So like a year and a half ago, marketing wise, we changed it from PlantPAx process objects to Rockwell's process object library. What you notice is I'm showing version 4, system release of PlantPAx is 4.5. They are not in lockstep. So in the documentation, in the way that we do characterization, you will see all the documentation reference this library version, because this is taking advantage of all the new software. But you can use it with the compact logics, you can use it with the ControlLogix, you can do process SCID, you can do discrete, and it's free. It's a free download off the PCDC. All you have to do is type in process, and it'll usually be the first hit. So if this is something that you guys are interested in and you can't find it, let me know, I'll send you a link. So, and the nice thing is, and you'll see what I show you, there's a sample code library that goes with it, so it's an easy way of getting to learn the system. So part of that, a couple of things that are coming out with that new library, one is a tie-in to Asset Center. So there is going to be a new DTM functionality here so that you can now do a FactoryTalk links communication DTM, so that's that device type manager, to be able to do Ethernet IP type devices. So So this is just a new edit. This is something that came out to be able to get into your hard Pro-Field Bus PA Foundation Field Bus. So. One other edit that came out is for anybody that's doing anything with switchgear. So traditionally, Rockwell does not play in the switchgear market, but we do tie into switchgear. So anything that is 61850, whether it's coming from Rockwell or whether it's coming from Schweitzer, we now have a partnership there where we have a process object library that ties in directly to that. And we also have an offering, which is that guy right there, that comes in a pre-configured panel from Rockwell. So you can either get the pre-configured panel from Rockwell or you can tie in natively, but it's a ControlLogix backend on our end. So we can use from the DCS, from a process skid, to the intelligent motor control, to the switchgear, all of it on the same front end. So this is just using FactoryTalk View SE. So again, if you guys are interested, this will be included in the new library, but if you need more information specific to doing this type of connection, we can always do that offline. Now to get into the bread and butter of the actual process objects. This is the look and feel. It used to be 50 shades of gray. It's now gone to 100 shades of gray. So for anybody that knows the process space, a lot of the times what we start looking at is everything's muted. So they go to making it so that the operators that are looking at this should not be seeing 3D graphics, a bunch of colored graphics, things of that nature. Why? Because they want the operator to be able to, if they see color, if they see something flashing, to actually be able to action off of it. So that's all part of the high performance HMI standards that are coming out more and more through ISA and a couple others. So what they've done with the newer release is they've gone through the new iteration. They've skinnied down the process objects. So for anybody that has played with them before, they are a lot smaller footprint than they used to be. And they've changed it a lot so that it's a lot easier to navigate when it comes to just looking at it. It is very grayscale, and you'll see it when I show the demo. The only pieces of it that have color is anything that's moving. So if it's a variable that's changing and the temperature going up and down, that might be in blue. Everything else is going to be grayscale. And if you see a bunch of color or anything blinking, that should be an alarm, or that should be a reason to open up the block and figure out what's going on. So you still have your basic type faceplate and you have your advanced features on it. The idea with these blocks is it doesn't matter who's logged in, you should be able to see all the information. But if you are logged in as either an administrator or maintenance user, at that point, you now have functionality to be able to change things. You can turn things on and off, you can change set points, you can go in there and make modifications. Anything that has an analog signal attached to it automatically comes with a trend. So that makes your life easier. If you want to, you can go in and tie that into our historian. So it's a full historical trend instead of just a standard in real time. We still have the idea of a little quick faceplate. So if you want, you can click on it and just get a little operator quick display instead of the full information. You can tie that into the user definition. So depending on who's logging in, they can get a different look and feel. And the other nice thing that they started adding is these little quick trace pens on the analog signals. So as you leave the faceplate up on the screen, you can now see where that analog signal has been traveling while you have it on the screen, instead of having to open up an additional trend. Some of the things that they've done with the alarming is built in. So all the process objects have defined alarming capabilities inside of it. So if you look at it like an analog, you'll get high, 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 low, 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 and then essentially a break in the chain. So a broken wire type signal. All of that now propagates. You can set your deadband. So as it progresses, you get your high. If it keeps going, you get your high, high. You can set severities on that. And now from the screen, you can both acknowledge the alarm, but you can also see what's been happening. And as part of the full system for FactoryTalk View, you are getting an audit trail of time and date stamp on when these alarms came in. So that is already native in the product. A couple other things that, like I said, so lighter footprint on these. So they removed some of the kind of overhead on some of the blocks that a lot of people would complain about. So they've gone in and made some modifications on how it's configured. For anybody that has used the process objects in the past, they're very similar as far as how you configure. So it makes things a lot easier. You can still import and export and use different versions of it, and they will be backwards compatible. So just because the process objects are coming out as part of the system release for the DCS, you can still go back and use them in version 24. Okay? The only requirement is going to be the FactoryTalk View version will have to be a version 10. But the actual controller side of it can be pushed back to something older than 31. If you choose to use an L8 controller with the library objects, there's nothing to say that you can't do it. We have a Knowledgebase article that we've talked about in the past. The big issue that everybody should know in this room is an L8 does not support redundancy. So in a traditional PlantPAx or DCS system, it's probably not something that we would normally throw into the system. It could be a one-off, it could be tied into a different piece of your entire process organization, but it wouldn't be your main process control system because there's no redundancy as of yet. But using this with either the 5380 or the L8 processor is full bore. So what you have to do is one of the things I came up with is when you launch an L8, the LCPU option, that is a block that tells you all of the information, the task monitor tool, if you've ever used that, that information was part of that LCPU. It was a little adding graphic so that on the HMI, you would be able to see the memory usage, the CPU usage, the connections that you have on a processor. The L8 broke it from the old system because they embedded all of that information into the web page. So with this new update for the process objects, they brought that back and it's specific to an L8 style controller because of the fact that it's a quad core and things of that nature. So if you want to add that back in, you can put this in. You'll get a graphic that tells you all of the information coming from your controller. You don't have to open up a different utility. You don't have to open up Studio 5000 to find out if your CPU utilization is high. And the other nice thing is you can set alarming dead bands based off of that. So if your CPU utilization does go high, you can set an alarm on the screen for it. Last piece to talk about here is a change to how we do security inside of FactoryTalk View SE. So for anybody that's defined any of our HMIs, so that's panel views and the computer-based side of it, we have codes A through P. And anybody that's programmed kind of knows what I'm talking about, where you set visibility based on that code. The issue there is in most cases, you would have to define the codes and have to do that separately from the actual user level that you were at. Now what you can do is that same user level can be tied in through the groups. So I can now nest all of this operation, put groups around it. Keep wanting to do a pointer. There we go. So now you can go in there and tie in the security that you would normally have as part of your administrative groups, your engineering groups, and your operator groups, and pass that all the way through your HMI system. No longer needing to use, you can still use the A through P codes, but you can now use this for a lot better granularity.
Can we change that security while we are running the system?
Yes. So there, you can change the security based off of the kind of FactoryTalk directory side of it. So you can make modifications from there. You can make modifications and part of the domain. So if it's tying in from a domain and getting your authentication access, you can always make changes there. And then there's a macro setting that you can change your settings via the macro. So the macro may not let you do it online, but the other two do. So. For historians, so how many of you guys have played with Application Code Manager yet? Shame, shame, shame. You work for me, so that doesn't count. So Application Code Manager is a utility that allows you to do modular coding for free. There is a charge if you want to do something else, but it's for free. What it does is it takes both your ACD file from the controller side of it, your HMI files, your historian files, and your alarming, and you hit a button and it auto-generates a lot of your code for you based on the templates that you decide on. Similar to what probably everybody in this room has done at one point or another. You got a big Excel sheet and you auto-generate all of that code for yourself through XML. This is doing it for you as part of a product design. One of the things that we've done from a historian side of it is part of the library objects gives you an Excel sheet with all of the tags that you should normally use in process for all the different objects that we give you. So a motor, a valve, a pump, those alarms are already dedicated so that you can import them from one piece and dump them directly into your historian. And now you get all of the historian tags that you should care about in your process system. On top of that, the new iteration of historian, which is version 5 and version 6 coming out, now takes advantage of what's called asset framework. So it's a functionality inside of OSI Pi that is native now to Rockwell that allows you to nest the alarms or the tags that would be part of those blocks. So similar to the way that we do the alarming, similar to the way that we do the blocks, if I have a pump, I might have 3 historian points that are associated with that pump. I can now see them in a nested view and they have parents. So any changes that you make to the top end side propagate to all of the children inside of it, meaning your scan times, the parameters that you would set. It makes it a lot easier to be able to do bulk configuration changes. So all of that is now part of it. And on top of it, it now creates models. So when we start looking at that in Vantage Point, you're now able to see those models kind of getting pre-built for you without you having to do a lot of legwork for it. So just a quick thing, that's already part of the library objects. You can always go and mass edit and create your own, but a lot of the upfront work is done for you. So if you're able to use it, I urge you to download the library and at least try it out for any of the applications that you want. They're all open, meaning that you have access to stealing whatever you want from inside of that. But if you are going to make changes on it, I would urge you to copy it and name it something else.
Okay. We sort of covered this. I'm Mike Masterson, one of the automation specialists with the Reynolds Company. With some of the latest exchanges, Rockwell's starting to utilize OPC UA. Why are we starting to do that? Well, for one thing, it gives us the chance to be able to use redundancy. Everything that DCOM doesn't allow us to have. So we can do redundancy, we can send a heartbeat from both directions. We can support non-Microsoft environments. So if we are doing Java or MCC or something like that, now we can approach that. And it is a free download. All you have to do is update your FactoryTalk services platform to at least 3.0. And we can combine that. So with we also have taken our RS Links Gateway and sort of combined it and renamed it as FactoryTalk Links Gateway. I know, marketing, just what we need, another part number. But we are bringing the OPC UA.
Be happy it could have been FactoryTalk Links 5000.
Studio RS Links FactoryTalk. So, biggest thing coming out of this is we're going to be able to do redundancy to third-party servers. Plus, we also get enhanced security. Some of the other things that FTP brings that DCOM doesn't bring to the game. Now, we don't have a demo here, but we have been assured that this works. With the new updated Control Flash Plus, you can flash 2 things at one time, and it does work. This is probably, yes.
So a question from the webinar, is OPC UA compatible with Advance?
To a advanced processor, no, that is still either Modbus TCP/IP or Ethernet IP, but Advance is able to tie into FactoryTalk itself. So from an outbound connection, yes. Same way that we would deal with the rest of the controllers and control logics and compact logics.
Thank you. I'll take a look. Again, we've added, I think we're pretty much fleshed out our virtual templates. How many people are utilizing these or utilizing VMware in their installs? Okay. Again, something we love, of course you do. All of our specialists here, that's pretty much the environment we live in. But we want to point out the operator workstation, the PAS, HMI, asset management. There are images for those. Again, the benefits for it is if something breaks, restart the image. That's the beauty of it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And if you need to, we can find a license of VMware free cheap, or Brian can. Now, Rockwell has also consolidated a server, and we had to do some research on this today because while we were discussing yesterday, we didn't really discuss what actually the product is. So what we have is there is going to be a PASC. There is no part number for it, but basically it's going to put together the visualization, the historian, the SQL, and the asset management all onto, we're assuming it's
an ISO image.
So it'll be both a virtual image and also an ISO, so you can install it on a physical box.
So two ways of approaches. Combined with it, it will give you how many?
5,000 historian, 2,000 IO points, single data server, and 10 operator workstations.
Right now, I went searching for documentation on it. It's not really out there other than the slide. When it is available, we'll say next users group, we'll roll it out to you because this is probably going to be a relatively significant price. I don't want to say decrease, but it's going to be a package price.
Yeah, so for anybody that's putting together a DCS process system, if it's less than 2,000 points of IO, we no longer have to separate out the servers to multiple. We can do everything on one box. And you can finally do what I always tell you don't do, which is put all the servers in one. If you guys are my system integrators, this is now a nice little development box that will be included as part of your toolkit. So keep that, because this is now going to be the demo that we always run to show you what the software looks like. But this is going to be an active environment that you can both run in a virtual environment or on a physical install. So again, for 2,000 points and below, this is going to be perfect, and it's already been characterized as part of our PlantPAx system. We're just waiting for the official release of 4.5 to kind of push it out the door.
2,000 hardware.
Yes.
Also, because we can now on our passes easily pass the redundancy over, meaning you're not doing you don't have to do 2 installs to 2 separate servers anymore. It's an automatic process. You do the primary and the secondary will be replicated. You don't have to reboot the system. The system will start up after the fact. This is a pretty big increase if you're doing redundant servers for our SE applications. The control panels. Rockwell is coming out. I'm sure everyone who has a panel shop application is going to love this, but we will have 3 different types of boxes that are going to be available. These are pre-populated IO cabinets. They're going to come 3 ways. A standard blank panel, which is basically just going to have drill holes and racks installed. Then there will be a version where the IO is actually installed. And then there's going to be a custom application. So it's 3 different ways. So there will be a documentation on it. In fact, the technical document for it will be a 1711-TD. It's not out there on the market, so I can't go into a whole lot more detail. But the first 2 parts are going to be standard products. I'm not going to say it's going to be a stockable item for us, but it should be a fast turnaround. Anything, if you need to add push buttons, lights, HMI to it, that would make it a non-standard product, so that would put it in the third tier where it has to actually be engineered. But these will be standard part numbers. So when we're doing our process estimation tools or putting together our DCSs, we'll be able to throw these into our estimates. So at least you will have that cabinet information for you to work with.
Is that standard with IFM modules and everything?
That's part of the configuration. And also what I read was part of the configuration is these will be network cabinets, and the basic ones will have redundant 5700s, static switches as part of the install. All right.
All right. Thanks. So my name is David, and I'm also a specialist with the Reynolds Company, and I always get to do the batch slides, so it's my turn now. But I do like batch, so that works out.
He was voluntold.
Yeah. So PlantPAx 4.5 utilizes batch version 13, and batch 13's been out for about 6 months, but now PlantPAx is catching up. So part of that batch release is an update to the batch visualization options you can have, and so the main point of this is it doesn't replace an operator workstation; it adds to it. So all the batch screens that, if you're not familiar with batch e-procedure and just the ability to run through batches on an operator workstation, those graphics are now available on something that's called Batch View. And Batch View is based on HTML5 technology. So what that gives us the ability to do is you can take these graphics, and you don't have to run them only in an operator workstation. You can run them on an iOS or an Android operating system through a web browser. So in addition to having that operator workstation, you can also operate and look at batches in other ways. And I think that's kind of the way that technology is pushing us on the visualization side. So that's a big step forward. Which, oops, oh, no, sorry, skip. So along with that HTML5 support, with PlantPAx 4.5 also has a mobile alarming interface, and that's the same, utilizing the same technology. Now you can acknowledge and view alarms from your mobile devices instead of having to be in an operator workstation environment. So again, that's providing more productivity options for the customer, for your operations. The other thing around protected and availability, the PRP architecture is supported in PlantPAx 4.5. A couple of months back, we did a full user group on PRP and on architecture, so I won't go into details on how this works, but essentially the PRP stands for Parallel Redundancy Protocol. So in addition to a self-healing ring in the PlantPAx environment, now we can move up to a parallel redundancy protocol architecture within PlantPAx.
So basically what we're doing, I know Louis touched upon it at the beginning of the session, was we're running two networks out of the EN2T PRP card. Each port is its own independent network, unlike the EN2TR cards. So it's a nice situation. It works if your customer needs that level of redundancy. It can be very switch intensive. Just remember, it's not going to be cheap to deploy because you're going to have lots of switches involved in it. Yeah. We like it. So promote this as much as possible.
Now, these are standard 5700 switches here?
Yes. If you, to put a device that doesn't support PRP on it, there are some of the switches, the 5400s that do support that protocol.
So-
And it's not a Rockwell specific protocol. Other people support the PRP protocols.
Yeah, it's that IEC. If you see that numbering scheme, that 439-3, that's what gets called out in the specs, so that would be why we would go after it. A standard device level ring has a 3 millisecond uptime. So we call that a reconvergence rate. So if you pull the cable, within 3 milliseconds, the network heals itself. So all of the IO, in most cases, you have it running at about 12 milliseconds at normal. So system doesn't see a blip. You'll get diagnostics on that. It'll tell you from what IP address to what IP address you broke the chain, but nothing happens to the overall network. The operators don't see anything. For companies or customers that need 0 milliseconds, so basically a bumpless transfer, that's where PRP comes in place because of the fact that we're actually sending traffic through both cables. So you got an A and a B channel. And essentially, if you lose everything on the A, it doesn't care because it's already been transmitting on B. So
And
that is the
voting's
reason why
done.
we go for it.
Whatever data gets there first, second place gets thrown out. So that's all done for you.
Okay, so next topic, we're going to talk a little bit about the PlantPAx System Estimator. So just by a show of hands, who is familiar with the System Estimator? It's part of IAB. So if, okay, that's a decent show.
You guys can get extra lunch.
Yeah, so anybody that's done a PlantPAx system, it's really pretty much a requirement to get to use the System Estimator. It keeps you kind of on the yellow brick road to success on a PlantPAx system. And so there are some enhancements with 4.5.
And if anybody here doesn't have the product selection toolbox or IAB, we have DVDs up here if you want to take one to install it and play with it yourself. This is exactly what we're going to show you. It's free. And for people on the webinar, I'll post a link right now.
You can do it if you. Look at you.
Okay, so updates. So a couple of things. There's been some updates to the way that operator workstations are sized, and so that's a part of that's been implemented in the 4.5. We've also the estimator has also added the ability to add thin clients and thin manager technology into the estimator, where before on older versions you had to kind of do that yourself. That's a big plus. So that helps put everything together. And then because of that, when you build your BOM tree and your virtualization systems, it kind of makes things look a little bit more seamless. Okay, also the ability to add a data center, that's been streamlined. You could do that before, but there's been some updates to that. The ability to get a little more detail on implementing more of the details of the data center inside your estimator. The reason why that's important, especially with virtualization, when you're building your system, one of the key points of the estimator is trying to size everything correctly. And so obviously it's critical to get that data center sized in the design phase of your project, and not in the implementation phase, and realize, oh, we don't have enough RAM, or we don't have enough CPU, et cetera, et cetera.
And this will help a lot for those of you that have messed with the Stratus configurators. It's just an Excel spreadsheet that Stratus has out to help size their FT servers. This is basically the same thing, so that you can go out and buy your Dell box, HP box, Cisco box with whatever specifications you need if you don't need that redundant FT server.
Okay, and as I said before, Thin Manager integration into the Estimator tool. Beforehand, you had to, if you wanted to use Thin Manager, you had to kind of outside of the tool, you had to add it. Now it's built in as part of the initial configuration. That helps out to eliminate mistakes and errors when you're creating that bill of material, which is so important. And the combo license. So this is a new thing. So about 6 months ago or so, Rockwell came out with what they call combo licenses for FactoryTalk View. And we did talk about that a few months ago, meaning instead of having to buy individual clients or view nodes, you can buy them either in packs of 10 or 25. Well, now that's been implemented in PlantPAx 4.5. So that's really a simplification and really to provide you more capabilities to expand your visualization without having to cut POs to add one view node here, one view node there. It's a good.
And do highly consider the bundles when you're if you're ordering, because certain packages or the bundle is actually cheaper than just the unlimited server by itself. So please do look at the bundles. It is a pretty good deal.
It saves you at least a good $45,000 from putting everything independent versus just bundling it all together. So even if you get a couple extra clients at the end of the day, not that big of a deal. Especially again, if we're able to sell you Thin Manager as well, you can now use those extra licenses on your tablet or phone. So that's an option.
The other thing to note, it's written there kind of in small writing, but PlantPAx has been able to expand its scale slightly from a limit of 50 clients up to 80. So 80 clients, I don't think I've ever seen a DCS that big, but
No, but if you guys are planning to do something, that'd be cool.
Yeah. MCC improvement. I personally haven't used the MCC tool, but just to know that is part of PLantPAx Estimator. So if you do have MCCs and other things that you may not consider in the DCS, what we do, and so there's been some improvements there.
So for anybody that's power friendly, what we used to do in the past over like a year ago is we had to go individually and just pick out analog inputs and digital inputs and estimate what a DCS or an MCC would look like. Now what they've done is they allow us to choose the E300s, the PowerFlex drives, and just natively add that into the process estimator so you can see how that's going to affect my controller. And at the same time, one of the things that they're showing off here is because PlantPAx is not specifically tied to the library objects, like I said earlier, everything on the definition side is kind of built around it. So by default, it's going to give you the information for the process library. You can go in and edit it, you can make changes, you can use your own library, but by default, this is going to use an association saying, worst case scenario, if you're using art objects, this is what your sizing will be. And that little drop down will allow you to pick and choose which library objects you are using, whether it's the old system, the new system, whichever one. It'll be part of the PlantPAx estimator.
And also,
I was going to say, from my personal experience when working with MCCs on our networks, the way an MCC networks affects our network loading differently than standard I/O, from what I've seen. So it's pretty important to characterize it when you put it on and make sure the network's going to work right.
and when you install the product selection toolbox, there's something called current system updater. Sometimes when you open IAB, it'll tell you, hey, there's an update. Sometimes it won't. Try to run that at least once a week, because a lot of the calculations are updated pretty consistently, and they're just honing in better and better week in, week out on these, all the options within the PAX System Estimator.
So, question, so would you say that adding the MCCs to the network is putting more burden on the CPU that handling them with the regular I/O?
It definitely affects the performance of it, what I've seen. So you need to take a look at your system. It might not be a flat network. It might be dividing your power from your state control. It's something you need to take a look at the network loading when you add an MCC to it and see if it adds it. I think it's more taxing. Now, someone else might say differently, but I've seen more loading on an MCC,
So it's
which
tough
can
load.
be addressed. It's not a big deal, provided you design the network around it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say one of the most important things when it comes to MCC is we typically look at our RPI times and stuff like that. And because we typically set those fairly low in MCC systems, they don't actually add a whole lot of network load to the controller, but they do add a whole bunch of nodes. So that's typically one of the things that we look at is, okay, we may be talking to these drives fairly slowly, but we've got a whole bunch of drives, or we've got a whole bunch of E300s. So you can't just ignore the fact that you're installing an MCC with 20 E300 starters in there. So you want something, you need to take that into account, but it really depends on how you set up your time on the communication. It really dictates the network loading side of it.
Well, what I'll say, if you don't want to use this tool, get with someone on my team, and we'll talk to you, and we'll run some numbers through it. We know our hardware works well, and we don't want the network to bring us down. So we need to spend a little extra time making sure the network's designed properly.
Documentation. So the final topic is
So,
During rotation, making sure everybody has a chance to talk.
I'm Joe Pulaski, one of the automation specialists for the Reynolds Company.
I'm Zachary Rogan. I am a technical consultant with the Rockwell Automation Houston office.
All right, so I've said everything I need to say.
All right, so the last little bit about this is we talked about PX 4.5. We talked about where we are. The last piece is, okay, how do I do it? That's the documentation. So as we had with the last releases of PlantPAx, we will, with this one as well, have a comprehensive deployment guides that will be coming available online as soon as this next release of PlantPAx is available online. So if you go to search for these guides right now, you'll see they're for system release 4.0 and not 4.5. So do be vigilant as you're checking through these. They will say right underneath the name of it, as it tells you what it is, it'll say for which system release it is. So make sure you have the right system release to match what you're looking for. But these are super helpful. They work almost like labs. I'm sure you guys can use them on your own, but they work almost like labs in terms of guiding you step by step through what you need to do in order to set up major pieces of this. So where you get it, the selection guides are at the literature library. So the same place I'm sure you guys have gone to download previous iterations of this, it will be there. Honestly, it's indexed well enough that you can just Google PlantPAx distributed control system, system release 4.5 selection guide. And as soon as this is on the open internet, it will be available and Google will bring it up as well. It is, as we have found, it will be keeping the same, I guess, part number for the page, which can make holding multiple versions of this a little tricky, especially online. That there will not be an SG002 for a previous iteration, as far as I can tell. So we've got a bunch of these saved offline. We've got a bunch of them everywhere. I would recommend for the iteration of PlantPAx that you have, keep an offline copy, because we're not entirely sure where it will go. But
So you can access older revisions typically of the manuals online. Typically, the most recent one is be the one you download. If you go to download one of the manuals, you'll see the link at the very end of it. It'll have like a revision D, a revision I, revision J, or whatever revision it is. And basically, these will be coming out as a new revision. So if you go today, grab the manuals, you'll have version 4. If you're using version 4 today, not a bad idea to grab those. After that, you'll have to go through and actually force it to give you an older revision.
so just be making sure that you're looking at the right thing. So where do we find more information? Again, all this, majority of this is on the literature library for Rockwell. So if you're familiar with that website, go there. Some of this is now showing up on some more easier to access places like YouTube. So we have a characterization video there, so be sure to watch that, and you'll see one of the knowledgeable Rockwell experts walk you through kind of some information about characterization. And then the good news about this, especially for the library of process objects, I want to hit on this again. For every single object within the library of process objects, there is very sophisticated documentation going through what it is. What does it look like in the code? What does it look like on the screen? What does the faceplate look like? How do they interact? How do you connect, et cetera, et cetera. So as this new release of the library of process objects comes out, I want to make you all aware that for every little piece in there, there is a healthy amount of documentation and information to back it up. That just comes in the download.
I have not seen one less than 42 pages yet.
Yeah.
For any of the blocks.
And that's for like,
Any of the pieces.
right, and that's for like an analog in. It's like a 40-page documentation piece telling you exactly how this thing works.
But it works for me, because it has a lot of pretty colors.
But and it does cover both the HMI side, the code side, inputs, outputs, configuration, all of that. So that they're very detailed and thorough. So once you get the idea of how they work together, go grab a small one, figure out how they work together, and then, you know, the bigger ones are basically just go make sure you have the right data types, understanding what the data is.
So as soon as these new releases drop, I highly encourage you to go seek out the documentation that accompanies it online, so that you can make yourself very knowledgeable on how these things work.
If anybody wants to see more videos of just Rockwell stuff, we have updated our YouTube channel surprisingly well. So we even have some training classes that were done at Tech Ed that were recorded and put on there. So if you guys are interested, I urge you just go in there and peruse what you can find. There's a lot of things that aren't just process based. It's everything that Rockwell does as a whole.
And lastly, this walks through the selection guides. These will all be updated as 4.5 comes out, but you will have the selection guide, the user manual, the reference manual, infrastructure. All of these will be available in the new iteration as soon as it is ready. And then the last one is highlighted because that is something that usually gets skipped over. Usually people get the selection guide, the user manual, they figure out how to do it, but the how do I maintain it and the troubleshooting part on the back end, those manuals usually don't get downloaded as much, and so I would highly encourage you to grab those as well and equip yourself so that you can really quickly respond to, as you're testing and proving out the 4.5 in preparation for migrating to it, that you're really quickly able to respond to anything unforeseen that you have planned on. And I do believe this is my last slide. Just kidding.
This is actually a really good slide. I've downloaded this tool and played with it a little bit, but there's actually a tool to make sure that your system is compliant. Make sure that it's good, verification. So if you go to that Knowledgebase article, there's a link in there to download it. It's about 1 meg. It's Excel spreadsheet, one little program, and a couple of other additional files you can put on your screen to see how many tags and stuff you're using. But it goes through and asks you a whole bunch of questions. You just fill out this Excel spreadsheet with, you know, how many servers do I have? What's the loading on them? CPU loading, memory size. How many pages do I have on my HMI? How many tags am I pulling? How many am I pulling continuously? And it goes through and analyzes all those and tells you whether you're good or not. It'll give you that, you know, green, yellow, red analysis of each of those things. Some of this data is kind of hard to do on the front end, so it's one of those you have to really use this on the back end after you've got the system up and running. But it's a good way to verify that the system's actually meets all the characterization that we've got. So, like I said, there's a multi-page Excel spreadsheet that covers the controllers, covers the PAS, the HMI side, covers servers, virtualization, all of those different pieces. So there's 5 different tabs in that Excel spreadsheet to give you all of the stuff you need to know that you've got it configured correctly. And then a tool to extract information from the HMI so that you don't have to try to go find it. And then another couple of displays, pieces, objects you can add to an HMI page to see that information live, just for analysis. So down the road to make sure it hasn't changed.
And again, more documentation as the verification and troubleshooting manual is published as well. Definitely something to keep on hand and to go in tandem with the Excel spreadsheet where you're making sure that you're compliant.
So before we let you guys go, one of the things that I promised is we'll do a quick demo of the library objects. You guys are welcome to ask some more questions. Let me go ahead. Does he have to start by end share?
Huh?
Yeah, end shares.
Ensure, yeah.
There.
Question?
Yeah, is there any roadmap for support of updates on the new simulate version 31?
Yes. Unfortunately, it's not within the year. From what I've been told, we're probably about a year and a half out for the L8 or at the tail end of the year. So the next iteration will be 31 for the L7, and they're working on, roadmap wise, they're working on guard logics, compact logics, and L8. So where that all kind of sits is kind of a little bit of an unknown, but it is on the roadmap.
Okay.
So I was finally able to get this working, and I had to bring in a lot of favors to be able to get this. So this is still in beta. As soon as everything else releases for the system release, like I said, process library version 4.0 will be out. I talked about the ability of being able to do a quick little demo. So when you download the library, it's about 150 to 200 megs. It has every individual template global object. So when you're looking at the ACD file, there's a template file that you can download that has all of your add-on instructions already pre-built. What this is, inside of it, there's always a sample folder. And if you go into the sample folder, there's a couple of demos that are already kind of pre-built for you. Usually they're called like Mosquito Station or something strange from our marketing department. But it gives you every single one of the blocks that you can just open up and throw on a compact logics and a control logics, or load up just on emulator like I'm doing right now. So, and again, if you got that nice all-in-one demo, you dump it in there and you're off to the races. What this allows you to do is just give a quick little visual representation of every single type of block that we have option, and also from an ACD side of it, so in the Studio 5000 environment, what this would look like. So looking at the code, I'm going to have all my tasks, all my periodic tasks, because again, it's a process system. We don't want you doing continuous tasks. That's kind of called out. And if I look at all of the tie-ins, because this is an emulate processor, what I can do is I can simulate a bunch of different type of I/O and a bunch of different Ethernet-based devices without having anything physically installed. So this is looking at switches, pro-mass connections for an ENH type connection.
Unless there is at least one authenticated user present. To join as an authenticated user from the phone, you must provide a valid extension and PIN.
So, ignore the voice behind the curtain. So, as I was saying, you can also add in there different pieces of I/O. So, if you've ever done emulation, it's a lot easier to do it this way. As a system integrator, I would use it so I can do my HMI programming without having to wait for the person to finish their code. So what you do is you can add every single I/O card, every single like Flex 5000, drop in, anything that you would add into your system. And all you do is inhibit. So all the code that goes in, everything that's making up your system, as you hit start, as you change values, your code is still actuating the right way. So this is an example of my PIDE block. So as you can tell, when we're looking at the process objects, go ahead.
Does the new version, the new emulator, does this support also Ethernet devices or just OPC connection?
You can do Ethernet devices, but we have a differentiation between just emulation where I'm doing inhibiting, and we have an emulate OTS now that does operator training simulator. So if you want to bring in an external simulator, it can tie into the emulation box so that you can simulate I/O. So that's already out as a version 24 and I believe 30, for sure 24. So, but it does allow connections out, but in most cases that was back like in the days of soft logic.
Only allowed OPC, but none of you want to allow some Ethernet.
Exactly. So the blocks themselves are very Lego-ish. So you drop them in as you need them and you start building out the system that you need. We also have what's called template strategies. So if you wanted to build out an entire motor section or entire pump simulation with all your interlocks and permissives, you can just drop in the entire routine. So that is an option as well. So as we go through here, everything in here has been inhibited. I'm just running an emulation box on version 24 because at this point, 31 redundancy has released. And like I said, I'm just tying into this. And if I look at one of these examples on the instruction set, I can look at an analog input block that is tying in via ladder. I do have a couple of things in here that are done in function block. So you have the option of using whatever language you want, but the block itself is there. And from the library object side, can't do it. You can bring in and use whatever it is that you need to. So the template itself will use every single library object that we have, including all of the information from the LCPU, the cards, the flow meters. You can just pick and choose and say, I just want the analog input, the digital, and my motor. That's it. So you can pick and choose what you're looking at. Once you get into the HMI perspective of it, this will launch to the test bed on the top end side. Since it is SE, you can dock windows, you can do alarming, all of that's tied in real time. The 100 shades of gray, as I was talking about, this is a lot more muted than it used to be. So anything that you see blue is now a variable that changes from the controller. So these are quickly able to see if anything's changing on there. And now they added a couple different functionality pieces. Every single one of these is tied into a global object. So what that means is inside of the HMI, there's a little template design that you just drop into the screen. All you have to do is associate it with the name of the add-on instruction. So what that means is if I call it pump 101, I just give it a name, pump 101. I don't have to worry about any of the points inside of this guy. Everything is auto-populated for me as long as I tie it into the name. If you're using application code manager, as I said earlier, you are now doing it automatically without having to do that step on it. So again, we're getting down on that piece. What you'll see here, as I mentioned, so I just opened this guy up. I'm now getting a little trace line. So as my value in the analog goes up and down, if I have that open, I'm now seeing what that variation is. The different shading of gray here are my deadbands for my alarm. As soon as that alarm hits one of those shaded deadbands, I now go into alarm, that changes color to yellow or red based on my severity level that I assign. I now get an alarm, I can acknowledge back to the controller, it's in a handshake back and forth. If I'm looking at this, I can also do, this is where I would set my deadbands, I would be able to set my threshold levels, my trends, so if there's anything that I need to change there. So let's see. They now made it so that you can launch this in a separate window. So now you can keep an eye on being able to see the actual value and look at the trends on the side. So this is always available. You can open up multiple instances of this. And then all of the alarms are built into this. The diagnostics are also built in. So you can see what your raw input coming in. This is something different than the older library. You couldn't see that in the past. You can only see the scale values after the fact. And all your alarms that are pre-built. So this is an analog input, so you can define which one of these you care about. So if your system doesn't have a low, low, high, high, or you don't have a low and a high, just ignore it. You can disable everything at runtime. When it comes to our drives, one of the examples here is the 755. One of the big things that changes with that is you get real world text on what the errors are. You no longer have to go out and find out what error code 101 means. You can see that natively directly from the units. So you'll have your speed configuration. You can look to see if it's an operator mode or if it's in program mode. So the program mode means the controller is taking advantage of everything that's there, and it's being done by a PID loop in most cases. So. Configuration, you can see runtime options. So how long has my VFD been running? What my restart and inhibit command, so that you get a little flow chart for the cold start. And now you get a couple of advanced property settings. So if you wanted to do scaling on the drive itself, that would be part of it without having to open a PID. So this is showing you the analog inputs. All of these are essentially this guy here. and this guy here are the exact same point. So this gives you an option on the screen when you're doing your P&ID kind of layout of how you want the operators to interface with this. Do you want them to be able to see a little 2-minute window of what's been going on so that they know if it's a straight line up, if there's an issue, or do you just want to see the little bar graph and see where you are? There is a shading setting on there so that you can see when something is changing. So over the last 8-hour shift, you can see where your analog has been up and down. All of that's already pre-built into it. You have your PID. So again, this is built into the same topographics, grayscale. As you noticed, everything kind of now went horizontal before it used to be a vertical layout side of it. There will be graphics for both SE and ME. So if you're using our PanelView Plus 7s, these graphics are also available for those. The only caveat there is you should be at a 10-inch screen or higher. You don't want to try to put these graphics on a 6-inch. And if you do, just send me a picture so I can see it. So we have analog inputs, drives, motors, discrete devices. So this is, again, not necessarily for us in this industry. Valves, any type of analog objects. There is what's called a sequencer. So if you have 10 different steps, you normally would do off a checklist and you manually have to do it. If it's already part of the process system, you essentially use one of these little faceplates to program it all, and it does the sequence for you. You can set up pauses, you can set it so that it goes back in case there's any type of error. All of that is part of the system, part of the box. And like I said, all the alarming settings are already standard. You can set it by default, and if we're using, again, that application code manager, what we end up doing is you can set all of these defaults automatically. So once you set it in application code manager, you hit generate code, all of that will be defined for you. You don't have to manually go in and do it. So the idea, again, with all of these is at commissioning, we don't require you to open up Studio 5000. The goal is for you not to have to do that. You should be able to do every configuration change that you need to from the HMI. Now, if you're still trigger happy like me, there's no reason why you can't open up Studio 5000. But everything here on the side, those are going to be individual pieces. So if you look at like the analog input, it will give you even more options of everything that you're doing from there. So if once this releases, if you go on the website right now, you will see version 3.5 of the library. Feel free to download that. That way you can kind of see what the differences are. As soon as this releases in about a week or two, what you'll be able to do is download this new set. Like I said, the only requirement is that you're going to need to have FactoryTalk View SE version 10. But from a controller side of it, we can go down all the way down to 24. I think we can go down further than that. But realistically, we'd probably be on 24 on this. But full PlantPAx for the system release that we're looking at, FactoryTalk View version 10, Studio 5000 version 31, FactoryTalk Asset Center version 8, Vantage Point and Historian will be version 5 or 6. And when we look at Vantage Point, it will be version 8. So documentation wise, everything is going to be there for you. That is going to be the big change. So in version 4 that's currently out right now, everything was 24. It originally came out with version 7 of FactoryTalk View. So we've now essentially jumped up a couple of notches. The templates will all be running version 2012 of Windows Server. So if you guys want to use the templates, it'll have 2012. You can launch almost everything with the exception of Batch and Historian on version 2016 of Windows Server as of right now. We will support those coming in the next release, but those versions of software, if you have a standard 2016, you're welcome to install it there.